Hi Sophie, welcome to Disabled and Proud. How are you today?
Hello, yeah, I'm okay, thank you. I'm really glad to be here. Yeah, I guess like I'm okay, but I'm a little bit shit, I guess, as it comes with being ill, but I'm glad to be here in sort of like a half present state because I feel like so often sick people aren't represented in these spaces. So yeah, I am grateful to be here. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. Well, I'm really glad that we've managed to like make time work and make sure that we can, do this to our best of our abilities. And I think it's going to be a really good chat and I'm really looking forward to it.
Me too.
So the first question that I ask absolutely every single guest is, how do you refer to your own disability?
So the short story is I'm chronically ill and neurodivergent, and I'm a wheelchair user. I've got ME and fibromyalgia.
Uh-huh.
So people might be more familiar actually with long COVID. A lot of long COVID cases are ME. It's like a post-viral condition that basically causes chronic fatigue that doesn't get better with rest. You have to manage it with rest, but it doesn't actually get better. Your
Yeah.
sleep's not very refreshing, and you get a lot of chronic pain and things like that. And like the hallmark symptom is actually post-exertional malaise. So it's like, it's not just like tired and you need to push through. It's like the more you do, the worse you get. It feels like you're being
Yeah.
poisoned. Your body is just like not producing energy properly. And then fibromyalgia is more like nerve pain and things like that.
Yeah.
And then neurodivergent wise, I've got ADHD and I'm also autistic as well.
Uh-huh.
And I only kind of realized that quite a lot later in life. Like I'd already
Yeah.
graduated university. They can actually, it's sort of said that they can kind of hide each other.
Okay.
And yeah, and I'm not a guy either. So don't really fit the stereotypical profile. But I guess I'd say autism, well, it's a social and communication disorder. I
Yeah.
kind of describe it as like a little bit like being an alien. It's kind of like you never got the social manual of like how to do things, and everyone kind of knows how, but you're like trying to work it out by trial and error. And like I kind of academicized, if that's even a word, like social things. Like I studied psychology, so all of that. And it's like a lot of sensory stuff as well, kind of like there's so much sensory information that you basically can't really process it all. Yeah, I mean, oversimplifying a bit, but that's kind of some of the things. And then ADHD is, it's people think of it as like an attention deficit disorder because that's what it stands for, but it's more like you can't really direct your attention where you want it to go. So sometimes it can be like way too much attention on one thing, and you're like really hyper focusing on it. I mean, too much, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It could, the right amount for whatever you want, but also you can get like really distracted by loads of things. It's kind of like your attention is being pulled in so many different ways at once, and you have like so many thoughts at the same time, rather than just like, oh, like I can't concentrate on anything. But yeah, it makes like a lot of stuff hard. Like if things are like out of the picture, like I forget they exist, and yeah, stuff like that. And then I kind of have some like mental health problems and stuff, but probably mainly from these things being realized later in life, and like they're not being cured for my illness and stuff. So yeah, I have like quite a collection, which seems like a lot, but also they quite often come together actually.
I was about to say, it
Yeah.
kind of sounds like it all at some point comes hand in hand, or they're at least somewhat linked together in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people have autism and ADHD, or like some range of like neurodivergences. And I don't have EDS, but that's like quite a linker with like chronic illness. Like I think I'm a bit hypermobile, maybe on like the lower end of the spectrum. But quite often you get people who are autistic, they've got EDS. So like I know you spoke to someone else who has that.
Yeah.
And then I think it's something like that can make your immune system maybe a bit more leaky, so then it's more likely to like break down, and then you're like chronically ill and stuff. So that's kind of like the connector. But yeah, I just have so many things. Like I even forget to mention that I have like IBS as well. Like, and it's just like all of these things just come together because basically I'm just sensitive. Like that's my disability, is I am sensitive.
Yeah.
To everything.
And I think that that's a really good way of putting it. It's like, yes, you do have all these like hallmarkers left, right, and center, but actually at baseline, it's actually just because you're sensitive. Like if, you know, if the world was like less intense and like less like stimulating and you know, over processed, and I mean that in terms of stimulation, some of the things that you experience, you might not experience to that certain degree, because you know, the world is like hyper stimulized for everyone, but people like yourself who are more neurodivergent, or you know, have diagnosis of some form of neurodivergence, they find it almost like it's completely different, but it's still a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And my disability, like, I guess level or whatever,
Yeah.
really varies, like, depending on the environment. So if I'm at home, I can control it a lot more. Like, obviously, I'm not going to have some fluorescent lighting or something. But then you put me in like an open plan office, and then it's like, oh, wow, like I'm really disabled by, I mean, I can't even properly really work, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like very environment dependent with quite a lot of things.
And I think it's really interesting that you mentioned that you got like your diagnosis of, you know, a couple of these things was a bit later on in life. And I was going to go on to ask you, what was it like for you in childhood? Because obviously you get a diagnosis a bit later, that it can, I think it can kind of spin a lot of how you viewed the world in like your younger years. And how was that for you, if you don't mind talking about it?
Yeah, I think what's hard is like I was quite good at school. And I think a lot of things don't get noticed because you're quite high achieving.
Yeah.
So then it's like, oh, you find things quite easy and all of this, but it's like there was a lot of anxiety and mental health problems going on. There was a lot of like social issues, like just not quite fitting in with some people, and like some bullying and stuff. And
Yeah.
I think kind of from like age 15, I was starting to like really struggle, you know, when you start getting like GCSEs and like all of that. I feel like I've lost my train of thought with the second
That's all right.
but yeah, I feel like honestly you're gonna have to edit this like tiny bit.
Do not, honestly, do
What was
not
I
worry
even
about it,
saying?
because I think that actually this is a perfect representation as well, because I don't want it to be like filtered and edited. I want this to be like your experience, what it's like for you, so that other people at some level will maybe be able to understand that this is your reality. And maybe
Yeah,
that will
no,
help benefit someone in the future.
you're really right. And it's so hard. And it's like today I was like, oh, should I like get dressed in something, or should I be more realistic and like be in pajamas and things like that? Because I feel like when you kind of want to tell your story, you want to kind of tell it in the best way that you
Yeah.
can to be best understood. But then also sometimes that can mean like editing out like parts of your disabilities, which is
Yeah.
also not helpful either.
Yeah, exactly. Like 100%.
Yeah, but yeah, going back to autism, ADHD things and stuff, I feel like it made a lot of sense in hindsight, knowing that they were the issues. And I really wish that I'd known a lot earlier, because I feel like you think a lot of it is you, and you're the problem, and you just don't like. It was someone who was autistic who eventually told me like, literally you're autistic, when I was asking the question like, literally what is wrong with me? I don't understand why things are so much easier for some people and I find them so hard. Like we just had loads of meetings. They were like a colleague at the time, and it was like we were in a fluorescently lit room, and then I was like hiding under a blanket and just being like, oh, it's too bright, too many people, like too many meetings and stuff. And it's just like, if I'd have known those things earlier, I actually think a lot of the mental health problems could have been managed a lot better. And I would have felt a lot better, because I would have known what I could potentially do about things. And that's why I think it's really beneficial, whether it doesn't matter if you're self-diagnosed or officially diagnosed or whatever. I think the most important thing is that then you can take steps to manage things and make your environment better. And also access community, I think, is another thing.
Yeah. And it, like, as you said just then, talking about like your meeting and like you would have been able to manage that kind of thing better. How have all of your disabilities, like, how have you managed to go into the career that you chose with all of that as well? Because I always think about when you're younger and when you're like, you know, 15, 16, 17, 18, it's such a formative like time in your life. And for quite a lot, particularly females, because I haven't really had this conversation with any men, but quite a lot of females tend to get different diagnoses around that time, because that's puberty, right? That's when things are all changing, your body changes, and that's when people notice things might not be quite the way that everybody else is. And, you know, that diagnosis can lead on to having ramifications with where they choose their career path to be. And I was wondering, did it have anything, did any of that like sway you to go in one career or one direction, or was it like that was never really like an issue or a thought for you?
It's definitely been an issue. There's like multiple things, because it's like, how does autism and ADHD affect things? And then it's kind of like getting ill. And like most people with ME either can't work or have to work really reduced hours. And I can get onto that a little bit more. But first, I guess, oh, being ADHD, I'm so chaotic and indecisive. I feel like I kind of set myself up for really high pressure, stressful environments, because I want something like quite stimulating.
Mm-hmm.
But then also, you know, you want it to be like within your control and everything. But sometimes, especially when you're like a young person going into the world of work, you know, you're not really in a high position or anything. You know, you're in quite either you're doing something quite boring, or like me, I went into some startups to have like a bigger role and more exciting, but then it's like really, really high pressure, and my anxiety and everything was bad, and then I got chronically ill. But I don't know. I studied psychology at university literally because I couldn't make my mind up. And I wanted to take lots of different modules from different disciplines, because I guess like the thing that I just find really interesting is putting loads of different things together. And seeing things from new angles, like making new connections that other people don't see, and also researching things. And I think for a long time I thought, like, especially because people who are autistic quite often have like a special interest and things like that, that it's quite clear like the path you want to go into. And I guess one of my interests really is like disability things.
Of course.
But also at the same time, I actually feel like what I've only come to realize later, since like realizing that I've got ADHD and I'm autistic and stuff, is actually I really like this process of researching. So that's why when I kind of had to stop working like a 9 to 5, that's why I've done like a bit of the journalism side of things, and some of the online content creation. I mean, I've always really loved fashion and things like that. So I think when I couldn't really work, I kind of returned to a lot of interests that I had before that I'm, you know, a bit more on the side, and then I've kind of brought them a bit more into the focus, like even like watching films and stuff. And now I do a few things on like autistic representation in films. So yeah, but so they have influence. And I think also, sorry, I'm rambling quite a lot, but there's been so many influences.
Honestly, like it's great when people want to talk. It's so great when people want to talk about it. Like it's so much more awkward when people will give me like a 2-sentence answer and I'm like, oh my God.
No effect. No effect.
You don't know what I'm talking about. Okay, cool. Like next question.
But yeah, the thing I actually originally wanted to do is, firstly, I wanted to be a lawyer, which I think is like maybe what you get in your head when you're at school. And especially if you're like quite a high achiever, you're like, oh, what should be the thing that I'm meant to do, you know? And then I was like, no, I actually don't think the law is very just. And I was like, I want to do criminal psychology and all of this. And then like I always thought I was like quite this resilient person because I was quite high achieving. I don't know, those things are sort of meant to go together. And then I actually realized, oh no, I'm actually really sensitive. And I actually just don't think I could have really managed in like a prison setting, or like even being a therapist, just like dealing with a lot of people's problems all the time. I don't think I could have managed, even if it's something I like and care about. I think a lot, I don't know, I absorb it. I'm a bit like a sponge. So definitely sort of finally coming to terms with that, like, oh my God, you're actually disabled, you're not like some superhuman, really did influence like where I went with things. But I was only finding my feet before I stopped working. Like I'd only worked for like 3 years. I'm about to be 28 and I got ill like 3 years ago, and then I'd worked for like 3 years before. But yeah, it's really hard working with chronic illness, because like I feel like basically our existence is anti-capitalist. It's just like we don't fit within the capitalist system. We can't keep up. Like the wages are calculated based on like what it costs to live, but also like what people are expected to be able to work. But like if you can't work that number of hours, then like you can't really support yourself financially. And it's, I don't know, it's just like the work that you do is all based on like how much money really that you're generating, not like the value of your ideas. Like the amount of like time that we spend like on like medical admin, or you're like chasing and educating doctors, but none of that gets paid, you know. So yeah, it's really hard, and you get pushed into freelance work really, because that is the only thing that your body can like support. So you can do it from home in your own environment, and you know, you can take breaks between different articles, maybe not take some work on for a time because you're ill, but that's unstable as well, because then you don't get sick pay or things like that. So it is really hard. And that's not to say there's like not some really good employers out there who are offering like remote work and like a 3-day week and are like really supportive. But yeah, definitely not in the events industry that I was in, which was stressful.
It's so true what you're saying though, because I remember speaking to Nina Tame about this, and the way that she like explained like the work system, and the reason that we still have the work system today is because of Victorian capitalism. So that's why our working hours are like, you know, it's 9 to 5 or 8 to 4. And that's because that's when sun would rise and sun would set. So if you were in a factory, they wouldn't have to put the lights on, or they wouldn't have to put electricity on, because there is natural light. And that is how we have like, you know, that's how the working world started. And we just have not changed it to come up with the 21st century standards. And it's the same for, you know, like chronically ill, disabled people. If you were disabled back in the Victorian times, you were dead because you could not work. And that's not me being harsh. That's me being very factual. Like that's how it was. And that's how we still work today. And yet we are, you know, society's come on leaps and bounds since the Victorian era, particularly with disability. It's still got a very, very long way to go, but we're nowhere near where we were back then. However, the way that we work and the way that we expect particularly disabled people to work has not changed where it needs to. So that's why I'm always interested in asking about people's careers and the way that they work, because it's almost like I want to highlight that it's not the same for everyone. People like this 9 to 5, this hustle culture is so unsustainable for so many people that it's so detrimental.
Yeah, and I feel like disabled people kind of become a bit of the scapegoat, if that's the right word, because people are having frustrations with capitalism. Like they're realizing unconsciously or consciously that they're being exploited. Like their money is being taken off their labor. And you know, they're frustrated with how much they need to work to live and all of that. And then they see someone who is maybe too sick to work, and they think, oh, you're being lazy, I want to be just like that. And it's like, you know, actually it is a huge struggle not being able to properly financially support yourself and have options and choice and like freedom to exist as a disabled person, when the issue is capitalist society, the rigid culture that we have around work and all of this. So I feel like that, you know, if we work together a lot more, then it would be better. But it's frustrating, you know, even Labour, like the Labour Party, it's like the working class. It's like, what if you're actually too sick to work a lot or properly? You know what I mean? It's like you're left out of the conversation, but actually this is like a really, really key point, that like you shouldn't have to work to be able to live.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly that. With you talking about your diagnosis coming a bit later in life, I was wondering, are you able to speak about how that came about for you?
What, in terms of like where it
Just
came
like in terms of how, like, you know, how did you get to the point of diagnosis? Like doctors, like, was it you that went to the doctors, or how did that whole process work?
Yeah, well, it's been long. I mean, with one of them, I don't even have a diagnosis yet. I've been on a waiting list for years, and it kind of gets to the point where you're like, I could wait 5 years and then talk about this, or I could talk about this now, this thing I'm pretty sure that I have, that anyway, this thing that I'm pretty sure I had, rather than waste all my time waiting. But well, when I first had this friend tell me, I think you're autistic. So they're a woman, and they'd been diagnosed recently themselves. They're probably one of the first autistic women I'd ever met.
Yeah.
And we were very similar. We got on instantly, and that was really eye-opening for me in terms of like what it could look like in someone else.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm actually non-binary, but like at the time I thought I was a woman. Yeah, so that was really eye-opening. But the thing is I didn't really realize how hard it was going to be going through the medical system. So I just went to my GP. I didn't really prepare anything. I just said, I think I'm autistic. And they were like, why? And you know what I'm like a little bit? I'm really bad when I'm on the spot because my mind just goes completely blank. And
Yeah.
I tried to say some things, and then she laughed at me and she was like, your eye contact is too good to be autistic. I don't think you're autistic. So yeah, I actually didn't go back for another, like couple of years or something, because I was so scared about the same thing happening again. And it's like, it's a 10-minute appointment. Like you like, tell me you know someone in depth after 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Like people have this preconceived idea of what something is meant to look like. And it's mainly just like little like white boys, which obviously you're not if you're like older and you spent like a really long time learning social things, and you're like way better at masking. So that's a big issue. I was really lucky that I found an autistic GP, which I was so excited about, and he was the one who referred me, and for ADHD as well. So that was really good, and I feel like I was able to get into the system there, but I feel like a lot of people might not have found a good GP or something. Yeah. And also, there's a lot of, I know people talk about it like it's a trend, but it's only because more people are getting seen now. Like it's realized more what these neurodivergences can look like, beyond the stereotypes. But they're still, especially autism, I think, because it's like a social disability, really. It's got a lot of social stigma attached to it. It's not like the type of fun thing that you want. I mean, I don't know. I guess all I'm saying is I respect if you actually just don't want to go down the diagnosis route.
Yeah, of course.
Because I want to say self-diagnosis is valid and things like that, because you're not taking away from anyone else. People don't just lightly attach these labels to themselves, like especially not autistic people who probably love doing research into things. And it's like, I think it's more valuable sometimes if you have like a conversation with people who are autistic, or like do loads of research on the internet and like see what these things can look like. And like if you really, really relate to that, and that answers a lot of questions that you probably had about like, why am I different? Like, what is this? I don't get it. Someone explaining it. Then that's like, that's really beneficial. But I think the issue with it taking so long, the diagnostic process taking so long, is then it means that you can't really get support in the workplace or in school, like unless you have the diagnosis. And sometimes they pay for private, so then you can like speed it up. But obviously I'd already finished university, annoyingly. So yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm just saying it's really hard and it's difficult, and like there can be some benefits to like support and things, but I more like in terms of like reasonable adjustments. But I like you don't really get that much, especially if you're getting it later. And like there's nothing stopping people being like, actually this access measure really helped me, I can ask for it, I don't have to like prove with a piece of paper, unless it's some sort of official thing. But in your everyday life, you could just ask people to do that, and it's helpful, and that's great. So a bit of a ramble, but it's a good question. I'm glad you asked.
I think it's really important, particularly women, to talk about autism, because and I mean that if they feel comfortable talking about autism, because I know that it shows up very differently in men and in women. So like, bit of exclusive information for all of you podcast listeners. Oh my god, that was really cringe, edit that out. I work in autism, so like part and parcel of my job is working with particularly autistic adults, and I know that it presents itself so differently in men and in women. And that's why I wanted to ask this question, because females who get diagnosed, it's so difficult because it presents so differently. So like what you were saying about the eye contact and masking is that women are, you know, they learn these social coping mechanisms far quicker than boys do. But then it sometimes comes to a point where even women themselves don't really realize if they're masking or if that's just a part of who they are. And I think that's so like, it's such an interesting like concept that we, and you're so right with what you say, is that like autism and ADHD, what is your first picture in your mind? It's like the naughty little schoolboy in the back of the class, and it's just not like that for everyone at all.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to mention as well, I kind of think that people learn to mask by necessity,
Yeah.
if there is like more consequences to basically making a social error. And I don't think it's just women. It could be like people who are Black, people of color. It could be that you're like trans. Well, actually, there's a lot of connection between like being trans and autistic. But you know, you could be like LGBT plus in a way. Like, I don't think that it's just women are doing things differently. I think there's like a lot more to the picture
Yeah.
that like might hide people being autistic a lot more, because you know, if like there's a potential threat out there, you really need to learn how to detect it.
Yeah, I love having these conversations. I learn something new every single time I have them. So I personally believe that through any form of hardship, if you can look back and think of one positive about yourself that you are really proud of, or how you handled a situation, then you've learned something about yourself. And I was wondering, for you, through any time of hardship, have you learned like a particular positive attribute about yourself that actually you're very proud of?
um I think I think you're always just proud that you like see it through to another day. Like I think, you know, I've been through quite a lot of difficult things that never really end. But you know, just to like keeping going is really important. And I think also like the whole process of everything has also made me like more empathetic and like understanding of other people and accommodating. Like, I don't know, it just, I feel like I describe it sometimes as like falling down the back of the sofa or something. Like, you know how like the remote falls down the side or something? I feel like I've gone down the side and then it's like kind of like slipped down the back of society, and it's like really opened your eyes to how things work and just like some things that aren't fair and like different ways that people see things. So I think yeah, it's really what's the word? Been like a paradigm shift for
Uh-huh.
me. Yeah.
Oh, I think that's like a really interesting spin on things. And I like what you say about like you almost, you feel like you've been a remote that's fallen down the side of the sofa, where you've been able to look at things from a completely different perspective, and it's shown you what can work for you, but also what absolutely does not work at all. And actually that's quite an important position to be in, particularly when you have to go and explain, not that you should ever have to explain, but like when you have to go and explain things that you want, need, and or doesn't work for you, and as to why, because you're able to be like, actually these things don't work for me for these reasons, now we need to make a change, so let's do that from this way. And I think that's a brilliant thing to have, being able to explain as to why.
And also, can I actually add another thing while you're making me think? I think also like one response that I've received quite a few times, annoyingly, when people find out about my illness and stuff, is like, oh, like I couldn't do that. I don't know how you do it. Like the whole like I would rather be dead.
Yeah.
Um, but I think like it is honestly amazing how like you can just like adapt.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just think that that's a really like incredible thing that we do. And like it's a silly thing also to go off on, I'm just going off on tangents, but
Love
anyway,
it.
my cat is disabled now. Like a few years ago she got epilepsy and she got arthritis and all of these things, and like she can't jump up on things anymore. She has to pull herself up, or she has to like tap the sofa and get attention to like
Yeah.
us to pull her up. And like she, you know, it's not like she's read a book on this, she's a cat, but she's just like instinctively like adapted based on her abilities and like what's possible, and not forcing herself to do things, and like sort of listening to her body. And I think like I notice like myself doing those sort of things and like see that in other disabled people as well. And that makes me like, you know, just like really proud how we've adapted despite no one being like, oh, like this is what you could do. We've just like figured it out. And that is a tricky process, and we should be proud of ourselves for doing that.
I always say that nobody gives you a handbook when they're like,
Yeah.
you're now disabled. It's not like you get a handbook that's like, these are the things that you can do. These are the things that you can't do. You should try this. That does not exist. Like, it's very much a case of trial and error. And it's, again, completely down to the individual.
Yeah, because you all had to work out loads of things for yourself as well. I know you were like born with your disability, so it was less like a I could do this and now I can't do that. But
Yeah.
like surely you watch other people and you're just like, oh, like I can't do it quite like that.
Yeah, a lot of it for me is watching how other people, like particularly in the gym, this is where it like really comes into play. I really need to see how an able body moves so that I can then apply it to my own body. Because it's like I need to see it from different angles. So I need to see like what joints are moving and like what's bending and what shouldn't bend, and like what's snapping and what definitely shouldn't snap, so that I can attempt to replicate that with my body, because my body doesn't work the same. Like, people like to think that, oh, like, it's Brooke, she's only got one hand, and I'm like, yeah, but after that you don't see the issues that I have with my back, the issues that I have with my knees. Like, there's a lot of other things going on physically. The hand doesn't exist. The rest of my body, because of that, is obviously skewed. So like there's a lot of other things that go on. But yeah, you're completely right.
Well,
Completely.
that's cool. It's like a translation process in a way.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely trying to translate what would be like the average non-disabled person's movement into my movement. It is completely different. And interestingly, from the other adaptive athletes that I know as well, it's all different for them as well. So like no two adaptive athletes tend to work out in the same way, which I always find super intriguing, because, you know, their disabilities are on paper are identical, but the way that they move is completely different, which is just like, it goes back down to that individual thing.
Yeah.
And I think that that's incredible.
Because even if you look at like able-bodied athletes, like they have like different techniques and different things that they do as well.
Yeah. And it's the exact same for us too. And it translates to all of our life as well. Like, obviously I'm applying this very much to the gym because that's where I spend quite a lot of my time. But like that applies to all of life as well. Like opening and closing doors, all of like, you know, things that are super menial that a lot of people don't necessarily think about. Driving a car, all of that kind of stuff is completely different.
Yeah, and I think it's like so underrated, this in-depth knowledge that we have about our bodies. Like this is what I was saying, like a little bit about going back to the career thing, is it's kind of like, you know, there are certain things that are paid, which maybe we're not able to do. But we can add like so much value in other ways. It's just that it's not like seen as useful supposedly for capitalism or something, you know. It's just kind of like erase this knowledge that we have, and by medical professionals and things like that. But it's like at the end of the day, a disabled person knows their body best.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to ask every guest, do they have a bit of advice for either and or, so probably both, a younger version of themselves and a younger person with the same disability as themselves?
It's so hard because I kind of just want to be like, why did you get so stressed by everything? Like it didn't matter. But I think, it's hard because I feel like, you know, a lot of those things also weren't my fault. You know, they're just like the environment that you're in. And kind of like, I think with ME as well, you know, part of you wants to say like, just like, why didn't you rest loads? And then you wouldn't have like maybe got ME, but it's so hard. And I really don't want to go down that
Shoulda,
route.
woulda, couldas are like a thing of the past.
Yeah, and I guess like the advice that I would give is that like no one is actually really looking out for you apart from like you. Like you have to like put down boundaries. You have to like fight for yourself in like a medical and a work setting. Like you can't, like it's just not worth like doing all these things to like please your employer. Like I know obviously people in different positions, they want to hold on to their roles. Like that's what happened to me, you know. You have to put up with things. But yeah, I guess like just kind of like realizing like, you know, you have to like put these boundaries down for yourself. Like you have to be firm with them, like, you know what's best for yourself, but also like understanding that it's not your fault as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a really important one, is that it's not your fault.
Yeah.
Sometimes the world isn't, I say sometimes, that's a fucking lie. This world is not built for disabled people, so don't feel discouraged when you feel like you're on the outside looking in, because that's the reality of it. But reach out and like find your disabled community, because
Yes, that's a good one as well.
like you will find that the disabled community has the best sense of humor out of any people I know. Fact. Like,
And like so lovely, like you like I have like some friends online who, like, I have this one friend who we actually just send like snail pictures to each other, like that's like the basis of our friendship. And then we'll like chat about some other things as well, but it's like so nice to have people who get it,
yeah,
and that you don't have to keep explaining things to you, that like aren't saying weird things to you all the time. You can just like be, and you don't have to like, I guess your disability is not like the focus of everything. That's not like the conversation all the time. You can just send pictures of snails.
yeah. So I have like a particular set of questions that whenever someone asks me, I tend to either laugh, scream, or cry. Rarely crying, but quite often it's like laughter or screaming. So recently someone asked me if they could cut up my food at dinner because they didn't think that I could cut up my own food. And I was in a restaurant as well. So this was like out in public, right? And I was wondering, are there any particular questions that you find people ask you that are maybe a bit too much or a bit weird, or you kind of just have to laugh them off?
Yeah, I feel like there's some questions, but also like statements. Like I think the classic questions are like the really invasive ones where they're just like, what's wrong with you? What happened? Like all of this. And
Yeah.
it's like, you actually don't need to know. And it's like a really traumatic answer that I would not like to like get into, thank you. But I think what I find most annoying maybe is like, yeah, statements like unsolicited advice. Like there's a place for advice. Maybe sometimes you know more about a thing than someone else. Maybe someone's really new to something. Like
Yeah.
I had like a UTI lately and I was asking for advice because I hadn't had one before, you know?
Mhm.
But it's like if you've had this disability for like years and there's just someone else who doesn't have the same and they're just like, oh, like, have you tried yoga?
I was literally about to say, is it that, oh, you tried
Yeah.
yoga or like Tai Chi?
Oh, so many. I've had someone recommend like sourdough bread and it's like, I don't even eat gluten. Like it's ridiculous. Yeah, I think people think that they have control over their health. That is what the media pushes all the time. It's kind of what like capitalism pushes as well. And people just think that they're like, I mean, like to an extent, you have like a bit of responsibility over your health, you know. But you know, people are also existing in tricky situations where they're really stressed, you know, and that's
Yeah.
again not your fault. But it's like you actually like my chronic illnesses don't have a cure. Like people haven't researched them. Like if it was as simple as doing yoga, like I would not have had this for 3 years already, and there wouldn't be like so many thousands, hundreds of thousands of people with long COVID if it was as simple as like going for a walk. And also exercise like literally makes these things worse. I feel like people, I know you do love exercise, but, but like people think that is good for like everybody.
Yeah.
Like they think like this health advice will work for everyone just because it works for them. They're like, when I'm tired, I go on a run. And it's like, okay, like that will put me in bed for a week. Like
Yeah.
that is not the answer. So yeah, I hate that. But I also, actually, can I say a few things that I hate?
Go, yeah, crack on.
Yeah. I actually, well, the thing is, this how are you question, I don't know, basically any about this. I appreciate you asking because, you know, you're disabled as well. But it's a question I actually avoid a lot of the time because I'm like, I don't know. And I don't know what is like the appropriate thing of like, I'm actually, like, I'm okay, but I'm like a bit terrible. Like I've got chronic illnesses and like loads of infections that like keep like that haven't gone. And it's just like, I don't know, it's a hard question. So it's not one that I hate, but it's one that I avoid. I kind of like a hope you're okay question mark
Yeah.
thing. But what I hate more is when people like get well soon or like get better, and it's just like I won't. It's like a chronic illness.
Yeah.
Or when people are like, oh, or the how are you is okay, but if you ask it like, how are you,
Yeah.
that is when it's absolutely not okay, in the bin. Because it's just like, I don't know, like, and it always comes from people that I don't like know that well. And it's kind of like, well, I'm not going to get into these in-depth personal things of like the intricate failings of my body with you
Yeah.
right now. So I don't really know what people want. Like, I feel like some people just like say these things so they feel better about themselves, and they're not really like thinking about the other person, and not so much like just a general like, how are you, like people, you know,
Yeah.
it's more just my complications with it. But it's just like, you know, when people are like, I've checked in with the sick person, you know, and it's just like,
Yeah, it's almost like virtue signaling.
yes, exactly. But on the flip side as well, another thing that I hate and I think is such a problem is like how people are like accusing lots of disabilities of being like a trend now because they're big online. And I'm seeing it a lot with autism, and I'm seeing it a lot with chronic illness, and I think and even ADHD. And I think it's because we populate a lot of online, because it's like you're a bit socially isolated, maybe you prefer written things.
Yeah.
Like if you're autistic, and like chronic illness, you know, a lot of people are still isolating because of the pandemic and lack of like
Social
masks
support.
and lack of like social support, but like lack of like, it's not safe for some people to go out, but also some people are just a bit more housebound because of their energy levels anyway.
Yeah.
So I just mean like a lot of people turn to online, and there's a lot of people, and it's like, you know, doctors don't do anything, they can't help. Like I've been to like a pacing management course, that's all I had for like ME, you know, they just tell you to do less basically.
I was going to say, I bet that was so helpful.
Yeah, and it's also like you had to wait like a year or a year and a half before I had
What
it.
good pacing management that is.
Yeah, it would have been useful right at the beginning, because that was when I was working it out. But yeah, I just mean like, just because there is so many people online with these conditions, it doesn't mean that it's like just it's a trend that people were like faking for attention. It's really got things like twisted, because as I've said, like social stigma attached to autism, you know, chronic illness, it's really hard to work. It's hard to like do the content creation and like keep up with things and be consistent.
Yeah.
Like, why would you pretend you had these things? And if the only attention you're getting is like people accusing you of faking and giving you unsolicited advice, like, why would you do that?
Yeah.
So yeah, they are the list of the big things that annoy me. That's a lot
I
more.
think that was, it's really good to say that though, because there was a recent article in the Daily Mail that, you know, completely slammed people who were like, I'm chronically ill. And you're like, and there was basically, the Daily Mail said that it's all a load of shit. Don't even know how it got past the editors, if I'm being really honest, because there were just so many dangerous things that were inside that article.
Mail,
Pardon?
it's the Daily Mail, so like,
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Like it's the Daily Mail. So am I
politics
really that surprised? Probably not. But I think what you're saying is so true, is that these things aren't trends. These things are being recognized more. And like, it's almost because before we've not necessarily been given a space, or people haven't spoken about it. Like when you think about the rise of Instagram and the good that it has done for the disabled community, really in particular, no wonder there is more eyes and more visibility on chronic conditions, on, you know, disability, on neurodivergence, because there is a space to share it now where there was not before. And that's, I think, why people are getting, you know, on their is it up on their haunches, on their somethings, anyway, something like that. They're getting annoyed because they can now, like, you know, we now have a voice, and we now have a space where we can share what the reality is. And if that reality doesn't fit into your reality, then you get pissed off. Well, sorry, but like, reality isn't the same for everyone. So like, be a fucking adult about it, pull your socks up and get on. Sorry.
exactly.
Disabled community offends you, get over yourself. Like, we are here, we're not going anywhere else anytime soon.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I feel like also our visibility is a threat because it forces people to question things. So instead of questioning things, they're like, you're lying, you're faking, you're making yourself ill because you want attention. blah 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 blah. And also it's like, I think what really frustrates me is it's mainly women that it focuses on, and it's also done by women, like, you know, J.K. Rowling. I'm not going to talk loads about her, but she's also fed into this in her new book, which obviously I haven't read, but it vilifies chronic illness, and it's kind of what's contributed to some of these articles coming out. Yeah, so it's really frustrating. I kind of lost my train of thought, but
honestly, do not
I
worry.
think I said it what I meant to say. I might have
I think the point that you made, like, I understood what you were saying, so like I think that's a good sign. Like, I only have one final question for you, and that is, do you believe that you are disabled and proud?
Yes, I do. I think the one of the good things actually about becoming chronically ill is kind of like, and becoming a wheelchair user and stuff, like the classic symbol, I guess, is like, it's just so undeniable now that I'm disabled. Like, I need so many access things, or I actually can't do something.
Yeah.
Whereas before, I feel like I was just kind of like trying to put up with it with repercussions to myself, but now I can't. I feel like that has actually just led to like a quite powerful journey of like unlearning ableism and becoming like more proud in my disabled self as a whole. But I think also I want to say, if people aren't disabled and proud, like, you know, again, not your fault, because you know, I feel like the environment can also influence like how proud you feel. Like, if there's a lot of ableism around you, it's going to be harder, you know. And it's like, if you've got access to like more disabled visibility, and obviously this is why a podcast is good, then, you know, that like really helps with your sense of pride. But I think, yeah, I am really proud. I'm proud of myself, and I'm proud of like being part of the community that we're part of.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much for coming on today. I have really enjoyed this conversation, and I think it's going to be very insightful for a lot of people. And I think all of your points have been explained absolutely brilliantly. So I'm really looking forward to this coming out. And yeah, it's been really great to speak to you. So thanks so much for coming on.
Cool. Well, thank you for organising. It's been really lovely speaking to you too.